Yeah, are we set?
I don't know.
Okay, looks like we are live here. Let's see.
Check it out.
So give us about 30 seconds and we're going to get this show started here.
Just giving them some good, hard nasal breathing into the microphone.
There you go. There's 4 people who are waiting, huh?
Yeah.
Oh. Let's see here.
I guess that means it's live.
Let's see. Yeah, we are live.
Oh, okay.
We're good to go. All right. All right, you can put that away.
That was like 95 years worth of life that figured out one cell phone.
Right. Okay, so I apologize for our delay there. For those of you who are paying attention, you can go ahead and turn that off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looks like I didn't figure that part out.
All right. Okay, so welcome back to the Seven Generation Podcast, and I'm sitting here with a good friend of mine, former student Jamie Nelson, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show, and I just want you to give a brief introduction to our viewers.
Absolutely. So you and I go way back, obviously. This particular subject was first introduced to me as a concept. I didn't understand it. I didn't even know it existed until I sat in your cramped office, probably in the middle of semester in one of your classes. And at the time, I was still dealing with a lot of stuff. And you took it upon yourself to kind of sit me down in your office and explain what was happening. You know, the larger grand scale of what was happening with the Indian Child Welfare Act with ICWA. My name is Jamie Nelson. I am a Choinumni Yokuts Mono man. I'm born and raised in Fresno. I am a survivor of Pre-Indian Child Welfare Act. I wouldn't say laws, but I guess rules, concepts, archaic genocidal belief systems that were implemented by court systems and white supremacy, etc. I'm here now. I'm alive now. I'm a contemporary example of what this particular thing looks like. I'm not from 1865. I am alive, a contemporary man, and I'm dealing with this particular issue. I just remember though. I want to finish this thought though. When I sat in your office, you changed my entire life with that particular piece of information that you gave me. And I remember one of the pivotal things you told me is your, and you said it in the most loving way possible. And this is the first time you and I have had this conversation as human beings. You said, you're not alone. And it was the most loving way of telling me that you're not an anomaly. You're not a comet headed towards some distant planet far away from us that's just going to collide into nothing and not exist anymore. You're one of thousands of people that are making their way home. And I remember you specifically pointing it out like that and framing it like that. That meant everything to me. It allowed for me to get to where I am now as a person who can not only advocate for himself, but advocate for other natives in the community and speak up on issues like this when it calls for it. It's very tough. It's tough on me emotionally, as loved ones know. But here we are. We have to speak on this issue because we're on the eve of something.
Absolutely. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show. You know, obviously I have a vivid memory of that conversation that we had that day in my office. And of course, we're approaching a very important court decision that is going to be held tomorrow, November 9th. The Supreme Court is hearing Brackeen v. Holland. And this is seen by many, including myself, And I definitely want to get your thoughts on it as an attack on Indian sovereignty, on tribal sovereignty, and an attack on uh, Native American culture as a whole. And really, ICWA was put into place to stop a legacy, a history of cultural genocide against Indigenous people, really a type of genocide that goes back all the way to 1492, the kidnapping of Indian children, the taking of Indian children and placing them in boarding schools and these institutions that were meant to kill the Indian, save the man, so to speak. There's a long legacy, a long history of this. And for our listeners, people who are tuned in now or listening to this later, may not know this history. And so I just want to warn people who are watching right now and who are listening to this is that some of the stuff we're going to talk about is pretty intense. And some of the conversations that we had over the years were, the way I remember it, they were tough conversations. Yeah. And some of the things that I'm seeing now and some of the research that I've done lately, it's just heartbreaking what's happening to a lot of Indigenous families still here in 2022. And when people say, well, Native Americans need to get over the past, we always remind them is that these issues are ongoing. Mm-hmm. And the legacy of genocide is with us today. Settler colonialism is not a historical event. It is a structure that we're all living under. It's a structure that directly affected you in the most dramatic way. And I wanted to give you an opportunity on the eve of this super important court decision that is going to potentially determine whether or not ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, which was passed in 1978.
78 was,
1978. Whether or not this law is going to have the power that it's had. And there are some problems with the law. We can get into that. But let's just start with your story. Go ahead.
Let me interject something real quick.
Yes, please.
So 1978 is also a very significant year for Native people. It was the first year that we were allowed to practice our sacred ceremonies. Essentially, it was the first year that we were allowed to actually be human beings.
100%.
And I don't even know if we were fully allowed to be human beings, but it was the crux of who we are, the core of who we are. It was the first time we were allowed to do that. So there's a lot going on during that time frame.
There's a lot
beyond ICWA and a lot of stuff that is existed around that time in that space that was
100%
dehumanizing, that finally allowed on some level framed us as actual people.
The 1970s, you have some landmark historic pieces of federal legislation. You have the Self-Determination Act, you have the Religious Freedom Act, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, which is shocking to some to believe that Indigenous people could not practice their religion freely. But that was the case in this country. So this notion that we have freedom of religion wasn't extended to Native Americans up until recently. And of course, 1978, the passage of the Indian Child Welfare Act was supposed to remedy some of the issues involving Indigenous children being taken away from their families. And just real quick, before I'm going to get back to the previous question, but I'll give you all some facts, the listeners, is that, there were some studies done prior to the passage of ICWA. And what they found was that about 35% of Indian children were being taken away from their families and placed into foster care. And of that 35%, upwards of 85% ended up being adopted into non-native homes.
Yeah.
You are a legacy of that.
Absolutely.
Right here.
Yeah. And
that's what I want you to do, is give you the opportunity to tell your story.
Absolutely. So it started, my sort of introduction to the really dark side of this particular issue started right from the foster care system. I have a tracheotomy scar in my neck and in my sides. It's a mystery as to how I got them. I've heard stories from my adopted parents when they were alive. They told me that when I was in an emergency foster home, that somebody had abused me to the point that I had flatlined. That's what I was told. I don't know how true that is. I do know I carry these here, and I didn't just get them. right? They were given to me by someone, right? Something happened, something occurred. That was like months. I can't imagine months into this sort of white system of adoption where they would take native babies and place them into foster care. When I finally got into foster care, I was so battered and wounded that my mom would tell my dad that, like, don't go in and mess with the baby. The baby's sick. And I remember my dad was a truck driver and he came home really late one night, one of my first nights there apparently. And he came into the room and I was really sick. Like not like cold flu sick, but just sort of like life had already battered me sick. And I remember they said that he had held me and he nestled me close and was very loving. And I cherish that idea because I don't remember it. It began to slide again after that because my parents, as much as they may have tried, they themselves were vestiges of racist white supremacy in America. My mom was a staunch racist. My dad was less of a racist, if that's a thing, but he was also pretty shitty, like as a person, in a lot of ways. They were very abusive to me. They would take the belt to me often. They would always sort of treat my existence as one that was like I was doing something wrong all the time, and I couldn't figure it out. But I was always their little Indian boy. That was something they would always say. You're our little Indian boy. We love you. You're our little Indian boy. And this kind of thing just kind of kept rolling along, right? And at a very young age, I was introduced to racism by my mom's extended family. They were literally like prisoner gangster dudes, like Aryan Brotherhood type dudes, like swastikas up on the chest kind of dudes. They were terrifying. And I remember one time when I was about 7 or 8 years old, 6 years old, something like that, I was playing with my toys and I overheard them in the next room. And they were talking about how I was too dark. My skin was too dark to be Indian.
You know, it's funny that I remember the story. I remember you telling me this.
Yeah.
And did you overhear somebody saying, oh, I think he's Mexican. He's not that Indian.
Boy's Mexican. That's how they had that deep Southern twang. That boy's a Mexican. He ain't no Indian. And I internalized that. It's in the front of it's been in the front of my brain. I'm 45. It's been in the front of my brain for that long. That's what happens when trauma sort of lashes you. Sometimes it just sticks with you. As much as you may shed it and as much as you may get healthy as a person, some of these, when you go through a life of being snatched out of your home, out of your native culture, out of any culture, frankly, that you're a part of, and then you're put into a different situation, one that is completely the opposite of what you would have been raised in. As you grow older, you start to see those things. As a young child, I didn't necessarily see them. I just saw me as a failure. At a very young age, there was something wrong with me, innately wrong with me. I remember walking home from school, looking in a plate glass window, much like they can't see this, but there's a window, a sliding glass door. And I remember looking in this window of this home outside of an elementary school and seeing my structure and my face and saying, like, I hate you. And I had no reason to hate myself. At least I didn't think I did. I just hated what I saw. That stuff started to happen to me at a very young age.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's really intense. Now, let's kind of back it up a bit. Now, when you were separated from your family, we're talking about brothers and sisters also being separated.
Absolutely.
And so why don't you kind of explain that situation? Because you ended up with your family, but your brothers and sisters ended up with other families.
They did.
So the entire family was broken up. Is that correct?
The entire family with this particular, like my dad and my mother. So my dad and my mom had 3 kids, and each of us were taken into the Fresno Superior Court system and separated into 3 separate white homes. They couldn't even keep us together. Now, the really ugly part of this deal is my aunt Rosemary. She told me about how the relatives would come to the courthouse and try to petition the court that, hey, we're the family and we want to keep them. And the part that really kind of has torn me up in the last like 5 years or so, because I just found this information out, is that my biological grandmother, apparently this really destroyed her, that she wasn't capable of saving us because the courts just wouldn't allow it. Kill the Indian, save the man.
Yeah. You know, I've heard this story several times. I've been, diving deep into the issue as of late, especially with this court case that's coming up on November 9th. And the story that you're telling is just all too familiar. And there were so many families that were willing to take in their relatives. And prior to ICWA, the courts, would often push adoption into a white family as opposed to allowing the child to stay in the community, to live with the auntie, to live with a grandmother, to live with a relative.
They even weaponize the idea of staying with the auntie, staying with the relative, undermining a lot of how a lot of Native culture will work. Is like you'll go and spend some time with some other family members, but they would take that as this concept that there's not a structure in the home, and they would use that to weaponize and take children. Like the vast array of ugliness that was implemented on us. It's unique. It's special. It's ambidextrous. Like it's any term you can think of for just having this wide range, myriad ways of fucking us over.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And the history of this really does start all the way back at the beginning of settler colonialism. 1492 was very common for settlers to kidnap Indian children, to hold them as ransom. Immediately, of course, there was a slave trade that is, started here in the Americas, and Native families are split up from one another. And so the breaking up of Indigenous families is something that has gone on literally for centuries. And, there's a lot of people in American society who really don't understand the legacy, the history, or the structure of settler colonialism. When they think about Native Americans and they think about our issues, and they think about, well, all of this stuff happened, 500 years ago. Why are they still complaining about these issues? What would you say to that?
You're looking at a living example. Young enough, not a young man anymore, but a young enough guy where I am a direct victim of one of the more notorious ways of destroying Native people, taking actual babies out of the homes, removing them from culture, right? Removing them from family. And it's not just the removal part, as ugly as that sounds to people who are maybe hearing this for the first time. It's not just the removal, it's what that means for these tribal nations that, like, let's take the Wukchumni people. They went from in the maybe like tens of thousands of people. And after, Gold Rush, after all of the most destructive things that happened to California Native people, and if the viewers don't know, look up what happened to California Native people. It's brutal. Not that it's an Olympic event against other Native people, but it's particularly bad.
Yeah, the colonization of California is particularly awful. I mean, we're talking about everything from, scalp bounties to just outright physical extermination.
Yeah.
And
the first governor of California put essentially an extermination ticket on Native people.
A couple $1 million was basically paid out to go out and kill California natives.
So you got the Wukchumni people that were in the tens of thousands roughly. And then by the time all of that stuff happened, they were down into the hundreds, paltry numbers, 400, 500 people left. And if you start plucking out of that 400 or 500, you've already whittled it from 30,000, 35,000, 40,000 down to 400. And now you're taking the babies out of that 400.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be left with a people anymore. The language is dying. And with language dies culture, right? So you're stealing the opportunity for even the idea, the concept of language to be cultivated. I'm all for protecting a bald eagle and all for protecting a panda, right? But you won't protect a people that is clearly on the brink of extinction on some levels, right? There's some of these tribal nations that are just fading away. Language is dying with elders. And you're stealing children out of their homes, and you want to do it again in 2022. I don't say that in a way that says progress should always move linear. Progress doesn't move linear. There's ebbs and flows. Adolf Hitler existed after a lot of progress, and then we scooped back up again. And then we get the civil rights movement. We get the new Jim Crow. We get things of that nature. It's never straight up. It's always 100%. Sort of ebbs and flows, right? And this is one of those situations where we're trying to dig into an ugly, historically bad hole that we all know, we all have learned, right? We've learned that we shouldn't go down this route, but we're on the eve of something that may take us back into this route.
Yeah, and looking into adoptions, I'm just looking at the data. There's more families out there who are looking to adopt than there are children. And so, you have these very powerful lawyer firms that make a lot of money off of adoptions, and they see, Native American children as a form of profit. And one of the interesting things in looking into the Indian Child Welfare Act, looking into ICWA and the opponents of ICWA, right? The adoption lawyers are some of the most hateful people when it comes to ICWA, because they make a lot of money off of getting Indian children from their families from wherever in Indian country and adopted into a non-native family.
One of the things that's kind of struck me in the last few weeks, because frankly, and I was honest with during a couple of other interviews that I've done with this about this subject, is I live it. I'm a survivor of it. It's not very easy for me to kind of go back and dig into the nuances of this particular case. One thing that I've discovered recently is that there are some big oil lawyers involved, and
Yes.
I just couldn't really dig beyond some of these titles and some of the articles that I would read, and it just made me feel very uncomfortable. It's a familiar tone to me as a Native person when you start to see larger entities like big oil companies or just larger corporate entities that want control of native lands. They've always wanted control of native lands because what lies underneath that soil? Great resources, largely oil.
Absolutely.
And that's something that we've been finding, because white America, right, was all on board. And when I say this particular phrase, which I'm about to say, white America who's watching on this particular podcast, they're going to know exactly what I'm talking about, because it was the one particular issue that they took interest in. No dabble, right? Dakota Access Pipeline. What do you think that was about? It was about oil. And it was also about stealing the sovereignty of Native people in the process, right? So if you get that land, you get that oil, Native people don't exist anymore. And tied deeper into that is the idea of blood quantum. You have to prove who you are. I have to prove who I am. I don't exist according to the federal government, because Choi-Numni people don't exist, right? Federally. I'm mono, right? And I've had people essentially do the Obama treatment with me, and they do the show me your papers bullshit, right? Which I would never show them. I'd die before I would show them my papers. But I have like enrollment numbers going back into the late 1700s, right? So I do exist on some level. But if you can steal the existence of Native people by like whittling down the bloodline, all of a sudden those tribal nations, again, think of the Wuk-Chumni example, 30,000 to 400. If you start whittling away at those numbers, all of a sudden you don't have tribal nations anymore controlling that land.
Yeah, it's interesting. The people who are leading the charge behind this case, on one hand, you have the lawyers who do the adoptions, and on the other hand, you have some of these really big firms that work on behalf of Chevron and the people who want access to native territories. They've stepped in. They work pro bono on this case.
It's in their best interests.
100%.
Yeah.
And really, it's, in my view, and again, I'm really interested to hear more from you on this, is it's a direct attack on tribal sovereignty. And I think the way that a lot of these major corporations see it is that Native Americans are in the way. Native American nations, this idea of tribal sovereignty, is a roadblock to access to those valued resources.
And we ain't never been nothing but savages to them. And I know that's a concept a lot of people aren't familiar with, but the way that they thought of us in 1845 is the way that they still think of us now. They think we're a stereotype. They think we're all drunks. They think we're just sort of these people that are just destitute, have no real value, and Jesus Christ, can we get them out of the way?
Yeah, it's in the argument as well in Bracking versus Holland. This idea that whites are being discriminated against as well.
That shit blows my mind.
It is really an unbelievable demonstration of privilege. I mean, it's incomprehensible when you think about it. Is
a complete mind F.
And that's really the main argument, is that they're being discriminated against because they are white.
The baby's initials is what they use, and they say the baby's initials, God bless that little baby, right? But they're like, that baby's not a property of Native American tribes. That baby is an American, and that baby is a Texan. I read that shit. I cannot wrap my mind around any white person using concepts like that. This idea that there's an oppressive quality to something, right, involving them. It's just simply not a thing. It's more of the realities that we have. Like, I'm really living this life that I've lived. I was really taken away from my family. I really have a fractured relationship with my siblings, right? Like, I'm risking it all talking about this particular subject. That's something that, like, that we don't think about when we think of the idea of an ICWA child, a pre-ICWA survivor, is that not all pre-ICWA survivors are on board with this thing. Some of them are like, no, 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 I've assimilated. So you're talking weird and I don't want to know you anymore. Like, these are real consequences. People are risking losing loved ones by talking about this subject. That's how deep these demons and ghosts go for Native people. Like, especially the Native that I am. Like, I'm a different brand of Native. I've never been, like, had the opportunity really to kind of like be immersed in real Native culture. Like, I've always kind of been sort of an outsider. And when you're really like forced into that state by virtue of being stolen from your family, it's really difficult to shake that whole outsider perspective. So when I can go to all of these tribal events and do all of this tribal stuff with a lot of elders, and I have like Darlene Franco, Wukchumni elder Darlene Franco has folded me as much as she can in her arms, right? Figuratively and literally sometimes. And there's something about that interaction because of the trauma that's baked in. It's just so difficult for me to feel like I'm actually part of it. Those are real deep pieces of trauma that we have to live with and we have to deal with. And like, and you're white and you're telling me that you're oppressed because of what? How? It just conceptually makes no sense to me. You only have one subjective argument. You can't make an objective viewpoint like this, that white people are being oppressed by this archaic ICWA law, as if kill the Indian, save the man wasn't an archaic, brutal act of willful genocide against all Native people. And one Native child that you want to commandeer from a Native tribe means that you're oppressed now? That's bonkers, man. I can't wrap my mind around those concepts.
Yeah, no, it's pretty incredible. And, if they didn't have the backing from again, we're talking about the adoption lawyers, these major corporations that want to get access to these valued resources that Indigenous people still control, this court case probably wouldn't be being heard.
If it was my court case, I would be my lawyer. I would be pro per. That's how it would work. I would have no one backing me up. I would be doing that bullshit by myself and losing, like heartily, mightily losing. They have all of that backing, and there's nothing that can really be done about it, because now it's in the hands of and I hate using terms like this, but like a staunchly conservative Donald Trump, Supreme Court. And I have no faith in that. They took Roe v. Wade and wiped it off the books as if it never existed. And now there's sort of this draconian approach to how we're legislating bodies. Makes no sense. They don't give any shits about Native children like that.
Yeah, I'm really nervous about tomorrow. I just can't, especially after, again, just diving in deep into this topic as of late. And I was telling you before we started the show, just how difficult it is to just look at these situations and not just be absolutely heartbroken for Indigenous families that have lost loved ones, the grandmothers who couldn't raise their kids, who literally lost complete contact. There's been situations where the government literally just came and took a kid away and the family never saw him again.
Yeah.
There's been situations where, these lawyers have not contacted the tribe, have not followed the law of ICWA, and have adopted Native children into white families. And these kids never even know that they're Native.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely incredible. The Brackeen family, they changed this kid's name. His name was Antonio, and now he has a new name.
Yeah.
And it's just heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. I was reading up on the story of a woman in Minnesota, and this court case is connected to the Brackeen v. Holland. And this grandmother had to fight tooth and nail to be able to get an opportunity to adopt her granddaughter. And she just ran into roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And it wasn't until finally she found the right people to help her out, and she was, finally able to adopt her grandchild. But it was just an incredible traumatic situation, not just for the grandmother, but for the child to, for years had spent time in foster care, going back and forth. There was a time where they wouldn't even let her see her grandmother. I mean, it was just incredible what they did to this entire family. The trauma that the grandmother, that this child will carry probably for the rest of their lives, cannot be undone. And you know that better than anybody. And you know, when you were taken away, you were not completely self-aware. You were a baby, right? So you didn't even know that you had brothers and sisters. Or,
but speaking to that, the point about the trauma that's baked in from
yes,
this idea, I can still see me standing in front of a couch. So when you're, 3, 4 years old,
right,
sits about chest high, something like that, playing with my toys. My sister was there, and like they left. Her family like took her home because they would let us see each other after the adoption.
Okay, so they did let you guys interact.
A very short period of time after it, right? A few years after it. And my dad explained to me that she wasn't going to be coming over anymore. And that was the moment that one of the greatest lashes of trauma to my life occurred. Because I still see me standing there, trying to process that and not understanding it. And I've been saying this lately because I believe it to be true. There's parts of that little boy that never made it out. I've come a long way to be here. My former rap partner, Boney, like we used to be in this group called the Argyle Pimps, and like is a really close friend of mine. He watched me the entire time I was doing stage performance with him, be absolutely, utterly broken, depressed, just sometimes incapable of doing things for months. And he sat me down one day and he's like, "Man, I love you, man. I just want you to know, like, you're a savant at just surviving." Like that was his way of saying, dude, just the fact that you're here, man, the fact that you made it this far and you're not just like blown out on drugs, alcohol, or some other wild shit. It's a damn miracle that you're here. Like you achieved CEO status of life by just being here and being a functional man that's alive and my friend, right? Like that shit meant a lot to me, because that moment when my sister left and I didn't get to see her anymore for a very long time, that shit fractured the hell out of me. So I'm going to give you this clip of a video, and perhaps you can maybe run it on the, attach it to the YouTube video. I'm not sure how anymore, or just run it independently.
I can do
There's
that.
a news clip from 94. Channel 24 came out and did a reunion clip. My sister found us in the phone book, found me in the phone book, found my brother Aaron. I have not seen my brother Aaron since probably 1995. He was adopted into a white home. His father, who's in the video clip, used to physically punch him in the face, physically beat him and abuse him, to the point that like the kid we met, this 15-year-old kid, 16-year-old kid, he was so distraught, destroyed, traumatized that he would speak to his hand in front of us, and he would put on these sort of theatrics for us, because he believed at the time that Kurt Cobain, who had recently killed himself, like lived in his hand, and he was just destroyed with trauma, and there was nothing we could do for him. Like, would that, if all of that, any of that occurred prior to being forced into adoption into the hands of this brutal man? I don't know, but we have to ask those questions. We have to ask all of those questions. Would I have gone through 20 years of depression if I was in my native family? Perhaps, but we'll never know that. So we have to ask those really tough questions about what the hell an ICWA, a world without ICWA would look like, because there's going to be a lot of traumatized kids, and that trauma in many instances comes from the fact they're being taken from everything that they've known, or everything that they could have known. And when they get older, they start to figure out, wait a minute, these old white folks, Southern white folks, because I was raised by Southern white folks, they're clearly not my parents. This is clearly not like a culture that I was going to be raised in. And you start to wise up to what's happening. You start to do research. You start to meet people like you, right, who impart this knowledge, and then you start digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's a wild kind of, again, like a mind F, because the deeper you dig into your own culture, you become knowledgeable, and you become, wise in the ways of things that you like, native issues, but it also kind of imparts more trauma onto you, because you can't live it. You can't be a part of it, because you've been stripped naked by this kill the Indian, save the man bullshit that you are so deeply traumatized that finding out more and more about Native culture is more lashes onto you, because that's some shit that you can't access, dude. Like it's just super warped. It just kind of keeps tumbling. This whole idea of assimilation, this whole idea of kill the Indian. What happens when you try to kill the Indian and it doesn't work? Right? Because I'm kind of an example of that. Because it didn't work on me. Some part of me kept it and refused to die, right? And then I start making my way back home. I become this sort of mutated version of a Native man who can't really reconcile things in life. Like those are the things. I don't want any Jamies floating around in 2024, 25, 35, 46 if you overturn ICWA. I don't want any more folks like my brother Aaron, who I haven't seen since 95, who's talking to his hand because Kurt Cobain lives in his hand. Like all of that trauma that's just imparted onto us, just beaten into us. I don't want that for any more children. So like, it's important that we talk about these issues. And there are pockets of people across the country right now, tonight and tomorrow, that are doing podcasts, doing interviews, talking about this subject because we just want people to give a shit. And that's the toughest part of this, is that it's difficult to get people to even raise a finger to give a shit and click a thing and read an article, listen to a podcast, look into the subject. And it's why these cases can get to a Supreme Court level without much, fight, because this shit is.
Yeah, you have to look at also the research as well, because the research is pretty clear that when Native children stay in the Native community that they're from, the outcomes are better. There's less depression, there's less abuse, there's less of all the things that you just talked about right now. There's data to back that up. And there's a lot of, evidence that shows that, the suicide rates is much higher. Obviously the abuse, some of the abuse that you experienced, the abuse that your brother experienced. This is not uncommon.
Yeah.
This is not uncommon. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. And I guess my question that I would have for you is, knowing what you know, for the person who just tries to keep it simple. Well, you have a kid, they need a family. There's a family over here, they want to adopt this family. Why should Native kids stay with the community?
I mean, it's the core pivotal things that we just discussed. When you take a child out of that environment, especially a Native environment, we are the most willfully misunderstood people group in this country. There is an active willingness to look at us through a sort of a European lens. So it's like, why do you do this? And then they don't want to listen to the answers. They want to apply this Euro lens and look through that and determine, well, I think that's weird. Well, you think it's weird because you're not looking at it through the Native lens, like the Native structure, the Native dynamic, the Native cultural way of approaching things, the sacred concepts that Native people have, the myriad differences between Native people. Because as much as you and I are Native, like we are, your tribal nations do things completely different than Choinumni people and Mono people. And we're not a monolithic idea. We're unique. There's thousands of different dialects, languages, cultural ideas and concepts, sacred ceremonies, all of that stuff. But if you refuse to see that, if you whittle us down into one singular monolithic idea, it makes it easy to not think of us as dynamic human beings. And if you don't think of us as dynamic human beings, you can start doing the wildest stuff to us and not bat an eye at it because you think it's okay, because we're just savages. We're just basic and we don't have any real actual human qualities outside of being flesh and blood.
Yeah. And I think there's just a complete misunderstanding when it comes to the status of tribal nations. People don't really understand what tribal sovereignty is. They don't get the fact that there's a relationship that tribal communities have with the federal government that's completely different and unique than any other ethnic group or racial group here in the United States. And there has been zero education on that in regards to just the general public knowing and understanding what their responsibilities are to Native Americans. I mean, there's 371 treaties that were signed and ratified by Congress, another 400 treaties that were probably signed, never ratified. There's all these agreements that are still in good standing today. These treaty agreements that were signed don't have an expiration date. And there's a lot of folks out there just don't understand the relationship that tribal communities have to the federal government. They don't even understand what it means to have federal status or to be an enrolled member, to be a citizen and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so this stuff is really foreign to them. And so it's really hard to even have the conversation with people because they just don't have a basic understanding of Indigenous people because of everything that you'd mentioned, the stereotypes. They just reduce us down to a caricature, right?
Yep.
You guys are all alcoholics. You guys are all drunks.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you dance, sometimes you sing.
Hey, you own a casino, right?
Yeah. Yeah. How much money do you get every month?
Man,
you know?
so much money from that casino.
Yeah. That's
that casino.
Yeah.
Right. It's just
you know, I run into people and they assume that all natives are rich now.
Yeah,
They're
I'm
all
loaded.
rich and wealthy.
Can you tell by my paltry 875 square foot apartment that I'm living large?
And then here in California, you know, you'd mentioned earlier, and I wanted to kind of circle back to that. You know, you have a lot of tribes that are not federally recognized.
Yeah.
Some of your people are not recognized.
Choinumni people are not federally recognized.
Yeah, and this is a big deal because if you are a person who is Choinumni, ICWA may not apply to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a little scary.
Yeah.
And I do know a lot of California natives, and this really bothers me when I, you know, talk to people and say, well, you know, to be a real Indian, you got to be, you know, a member of a federally acknowledged tribe. And I'm like, hey, hold up.
Yeah.
You don't really know your history out here in California.
Real shit.
You know this, is that there's a lot of communities that do not have federal recognition. And nobody's going to tell me that those people are not native.
Yeah.
Because they're native as fuck.
Yeah. So one of the things that during the Fresno High mascot thing, in case the people that don't know, I started the petition to remove the mascot image at Fresno High School. Well, during that period, that roughly year that it took to kind of get it removed, that was one of the things I faced from a lot of angry white folk was that, yeah, prove it. Show me your enrollment number. Like I will die before I show you. Right.
Really?
But a lot of older,
wow,
like sort of like older folks, you know, the thing that we're kind of getting used to seeing in this sort of Trump era, post-Trump era thing is like just a lot of older entitled folks who have conjured up these boogie monsters, these boogeymen that don't actually exist. Like the oppression that's happening to the Burkeen family. It's not an oppression, dude. Like, but that kind of concept. So it was a lot of like, show me your papers, show me your papers. You're not real. You say you're Choinumni. We know that's not a federally recognized tribe. So you don't even actually exist. Like just taking just all of the centuries of existence of the people that inhabited this very land in Fresno, right? Like, and saying that you don't exist flippantly with white entitlement, telling me that not only don't you exist, I refuse to believe it until you show me some papers, like just some like base level racist stuff. Those are the kinds of folks that we have to fight against and that we have to like stand up against just to get the smallest of needle to move, right? Just the smallest of amounts, right? To get it to move just slightly forward. Like you were talking about the grandmother who had to fight tooth and nail to traverse the court system just to have the opportunity to adopt, right? Her was it our grandchild, right?
Grandchild, yeah.
Like that's wild. And now you have this family that has big oil money, right? That doesn't really have to necessarily lift a finger. They just have to cry on TV every once in a while to get to keep this native baby under the guise of oppression. Bonkers.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the Change the Name campaign. Why don't you go share a little bit about that situation and how that played out here?
Right. So as you know, the fight to change these mascots has been going on for like 6 decades. And now obviously, as most of the world knows now, like there's been some headway. Like they got the R slurs moved. Yeah. They even got the Cleveland team to change their thing. Like, but across the country, there are like still these institutions, and this issue is directly tied into all of these things. It's all kind of interwoven, not on some like
100%
tin hats, like conspiracy level shit, on some real tangible, like you can find it throughout history, the way that these things intertwine.
Well, the dehumanization of Native Americans is directly tied into the stereotypes and the mascots.
Yes.
And this dehumanization is what has led to this idea that Native people aren't real people.
Yes.
Which, again, that contributes to the violence against Indigenous people.
Absolutely.
The taking away of Indigenous children, and then people just not giving a shit about Indigenous issues.
So when we think of violence, a lot of people think of like physical violence, like the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement, right? So
Right.
that kind of violence. It's the cultural violence. There's the institutional violence. There's just the oppressive violence that Native people face. It's just wholesale. We're getting a comprehensive load of violence still aimed at our people, right? So if you, again, back to the mascot thing, if you think of us as that face, as I was told, like, no, that's proud. That's a proud Iroquois. Proud Yokuts. Like they couldn't even figure out what it was, right? But it was us. Well, if you think that's us, then you clearly think that a piece of clip art, a caricature piece of clip art, is realer than the real deal. You know, like deeply cultural, like we explained earlier, the myriad languages and cultural ideas and sacred ceremonies that we practice. If you can hear these things being told to you by elders and you can just, nope, that's not true, that's bullshit, that's more Native than you. You're telling me that you're willfully, in your willful levels of ignorance, you're deciding that clip art is more Native than us. Therefore, this monolithic concept of Native people is more important to you than the actual Native people. And if you believe that, again, it does not affect you if Native children are being taken because you don't see us as human beings.
Absolutely. Or this idea that we're less than human and we need to be saved, and thus we're actually being helped. I mean, a big issue, I think, that Native communities have always been faced with because of settler colonialism. Many Native families are poor.
Yeah.
And many of these children who are being taken away from their families, they're not being taken away because they're being abused. They're not being taken away because they're being beat. A lot of these kids are being taken away because of quote unquote neglect.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that maybe they don't have enough food to eat, or the house is dirty, or what have you. And much of the problem lies in the poverty caused by settler colonialism.
Absolutely.
You know, prior to ICWA, whenever a Native child or Native family would see, you know, a car that they weren't familiar with, you know, they often had a drill where they would tell the kids to go and hide. I mean, that was really common.
That was a thing?
That was a thing.
Yo.
That was a thing here in this country, believe it or not. And it wasn't that long ago. You have people who, like yourself, right, who are about your age, a little bit older. That's what their family did when they would tell the kids, if you see a car coming up the road, you don't know who that person is.
Is the idea that it's like maybe like a social service institution kind of thing, like a federal, whatever the federal version of that is. That's wild.
Yeah. And you had kids that were taken away under those circumstances, which is just, it's just incomprehensible to me. And it wasn't because these kids were, again, being abused in some way. A lot of it was due, maybe they didn't have enough food in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
Oh, look, your refrigerator's empty. Let's take all these kids. We're going to put them in foster care.
It's a pretty insidious design. If you set out to tell, if you set out to say, let's make them really poor, and then after they get really poor, we'll criminalize being really poor by taking their children away for being really poor. That's a really fucked up thing to do.
It's terrible. It's awful.
That's a deep, dark design.
And this is a systemic issue that is ongoing, obviously, because in looking at the research, most kids that end up in foster care, they're predominantly African American and Native American.
Yeah. And
of course, there's a lot of issues that African Americans and Native Americans share in common. One is poverty.
Yeah.
And so you have a situation that is just really, insidious, where because of settler colonialism, because of genocide, and just all the terrible federal policies that were passed really to do in Native people, has resulted in a lot of issues, a lot of problems in Indian country, one being poverty. And in some cases, it's not even that it's poverty. In many cases, the way that Native people view wealth is a little bit different. The way that Native people view being a human being is not the same way that a middle class, upper middle class American views being a human being.
It's that Euro lens thing I was talking about
earlier. It's that Euro lens idea that we were talking about earlier. And this notion of the American dream, this idea that, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to pursue my goals. I'm going to get ahead. I'm going to make money. That's not rooted in Indigenous culture.
Yeah.
At least not traditional Indigenous culture. So the idea of wealth is centered around the family, around the community. around having a deep relationship to the land. And so that's really problematic when you're looking at a society that looks down on these people because look how they live. I mean, I remember hearing that so much. Well, look how you guys live.
Yes.
Look at your houses. Look how run down they are.
Yeah.
Why is it that you guys don't have phones? I remember growing up, we didn't have a phone in our house. Like, why don't you have a phone?
Yeah.
And I'm like, because we're poor. That's,
Yeah.
but we have family.
Yeah.
And
whiteness does this though across the globe. Like whiteness will go to like India and weep from, their taxi and be like, I just wish I could do something about the poverty here. And it's like, fool, like that poverty doesn't mean people are unhappy.
Thank you.
It's not a gateway to hell to be poor. Like you'll find some of the happiest people, like within the structure of like human beings loving each other, that money doesn't mean a damn thing to them, or like having material, wealth doesn't mean a damn thing to them. But when you attribute wealth to like you being a human being, then all of a sudden it takes on these dire stakes, because now you're telling me, well, shit, if I'm not at a certain, what's the level? What's the number? What number do I got to hit where you don't take my kids? 19,000 a year? Shit. What do you want me to get up to where you don't run into my fucking house and take my kids from me? Right? That's when it starts to become very real. Like, because when you have your fantasies about fixing Guatemala, like, be a bigoted weirdo and think that you can fix something, like the poverty that's going on in a favela or some shit like that.
Right.
But when you start to legislate it and criminalize it in a way that it's essentially what's tantamount to criminalization, when you run up and take kids, like, because it may not be criminal to the law, but I mean, we know from like Jim Crow on down to XYZ that law is not always the moral authority, the moral eye, the moral like thing that we should be doing. So if you think, well, it does, there are no laws to protect you, so if we take the child, it's in the best interest of the child. No, you're committing a fucking crime. You're taking baby out of my home, right? And you're lucky I don't kill you for doing that. Like how the graciousness of Native people for not losing their shit and killing folks for running up and taking their babies, man. I'm so surprised that we haven't seen things like that. It's just the goodness and kindness and different ways of approaching the world, like in a good way that Native people approach the world, right? That they don't do those types of things.
Yeah. Well, if you go back to the beginning of these assimilation programs where they're taking Native children and forcing them into these institutions, quote unquote schools, right? They're basically these brainwashing torture places where they're literally, in some cases, killing Native children.
Yes.
Many of these kids never even make it home. And we all know, well, maybe some of the listeners and the viewers don't know this, but, recently, I know in Canada, there's been thousands of dead Native American children's, their bodies have been just recently discovered. And so, this assimilation period was just absolutely brutal. And the families that didn't want to give up their children, if they did resist, they would be arrested.
Yeah.
And so you had a situation where, in many cases, families didn't have a choice but to give up their kids. And just imagine the horror. And I think about this period where you're forced to give up your child, maybe a couple of your children, maybe you never see them again.
Yeah.
Or when your kid comes home, maybe you haven't seen them for 10, 15 years and they come home. They can no longer speak your language. They can no longer even communicate with you. They have a different name. They've been raised up to be Christian instead of, practicing their tribal traditions. I mean, it's just horrifying. I think about the destruction of the Native family in this country. I mean, I look at where Natives are today, and it's incredible, just the ability to survive all of this physical extermination, these policies of forced assimilation, the taking away of Native children, the horrors of settler colonialism, decade after decade. And still you see Indigenous people still practicing their culture. It's an incredible story. It really is amazing. And yet we still deal with these stereotypes. You still have this attitude. And I think that's what is, really disturbing to me when you start looking at the families that are looking to adopt Native children. First of all, a lot of them they're white and they're evangelicals. Yeah. And they have like this idea, this crazy idea, like, God has given him this mission to go and save Native children.
Where have we heard this story historically?
This is in 2020.
Straight out of the Manifest Destiny
2022.
manual, the abridged,
The white man's burden.
the Cliff's Notes version of the Manifest Destiny. So on
it's-
page 12, oh yeah, we can just take these kids. Word.
It's mind blowing.
Yeah.
It really is mind blowing to think that there's people out there that people would qualify as just being great Americans, great human beings, but they have this belief that these people are backwards. They don't know how to take care of their children. Their religion is obviously the product of the devil, and we need to help them.
Never once thinking, maybe I should actually like go and see the conditions, go and see the love, the beauty that lies within Native culture, because we're not all destitute, right? We're not all
100%.
like just languishing in sorrow. Whoa, please come and protect us from our poverty and our cultureless ways. There's so much beauty that is flourishing across Indian country, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't look, because you've already treated us like a monolithic concept, and you refuse to look, you refuse to care, you refuse to lend credence to the idea that some of these concepts that are not European, because we don't put those glasses on, are beautiful. If you refuse to see that, then it doesn't matter to you. You only see what you think you know, and what you think you know is built around silly concepts, old archaic ideas.
That's such a good point. I remember a couple of years back, I went to Wounded Knee. I went to an event out there, and I was with some folks who had never been out in South Dakota, out to the Dakotas. It was the first time being out that way. And they were just really shocked how people lived. I mean, we were using an outhouse.
Yeah.
And even I was a little taken back, and I thought, wow, man, these people do not have a lot. But then I just started really paying attention to the way people treated each other and just the love and the community. And it was really powerful, and it was really beautiful. And I immediately thought, an outsider coming in, they just wouldn't get it. What they would see would just be a sad and pathetic community of people who don't have a lot. Yeah. Why would anybody want to live like this? Why would anybody choose to, stay out here and live out in the middle of nowhere? And I think that Indigenous people, I think that we're a powerful representation of a way of living in this world that is the direct opposite, the polar opposite of this really superficial society that we live in, that where it's all about money. It's all about how you look, how you dress, about what you have or what you don't have.
Yeah.
And I think that mindset of community and family, love of the land, thinking about the well-being of the community before yourself, I think that's still very much present in Indigenous communities. I'm not saying that's across the board, but I think that aspect of Native cultures, that commonality that we all share, because you're right, all tribes are different, but we all have those commonalities.
Absolutely.
Right? The love of the land, caring about community, respect for the elders. I think that is still very much alive. And I think there's something to be said about living in that way, especially in 2022 when, capitalism is just like everywhere. You just can't escape it.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing, you can't do it. You can't make a move without it. You know, somehow, shoving its, fucking face into your life.
And even myself, I remember when I came back, I even felt a little ashamed when I left there. The people were great. We went to a ceremony out there at Wounded Knee, and I visited the site, the mass grave site where they had basically killed anywhere from 300 to 400 Lakota. And I'd visited that mass grave. It's pretty intense. I mean, really, really, really intense. And then to just see how humble the people are, but also just how giving and
real quick.
Yeah.
Who put those folks in that grave?
7th Cavalry.
United States government.
The United States government.
Talking about these concepts of ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act, we start talking about First Nations people in Canada finding babies in graves, and the United States finding babies in graves. it all starts to tie back together, that the same perpetrator of those crimes is the same perpetrator of what may be future crimes against Native babies through the Indian Child Welfare Act.
100%.
So this is how we think of this concept. So it's not this parsed out, you pull it out of the thing and you look at it as a singular idea.
That's
Why are you
right.
getting all worked up? It's just a singular idea, which is a lot of the way Europeans think about this concept. Like, is this idea that, like, it's not an institutionalized racism thing, you jerk. It's one thing. It's the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is it's unconstitutional. And like all of those white talking points, they don't take into account the historical context, the historical energy that's been placed into taking us and removing us from our heritage, from our identity, from our culture, literally trying to kill us. So as much as we may be somewhat reactionary as a people to certain ideas and certain concepts, that reactionary idea is rooted in history and historical
Absolutely.
events throughout. Like, not even peppered throughout. It's like, if you look at the map of like our existence when at the founding of this, just look at 1776 and go forward, like from the founding of America until now, right? 1776 or Declaration of Independence has us as the merciless Indian savages. We've never been anything but that to them. So why would we think that you've changed your tune when every time you attempt to change your tune, you fall right back into the same things that got us destroyed in the first place, right? So we don't trust you. And we don't trust you not out of paranoia. We don't trust you out of lengthy historical fact, all of the treaties that have been broken, all of the murders, all of the mass graves that we're finding, all of the legislated concepts from these very, very smart and erudite
The
people
murder,
who know the right
sexual
thing to
assault
do,
of
right?
Indigenous women.
Yeah. I can't, like, when you tell me that a forefather is the most brilliant mind in the history of this country, and how dare we speak ill of our forefathers, and then you tell me that they're the ones that like pitched ideas of merciless Indian savages, didn't let women have any rights, just were a bunch of old curmudgeon-y white dudes who just wanted to make everything built around them, and they own slaves. Get the fuck out of here with this idea that them dudes should be respected. And I won't respect you, Supreme Court, or any other entity that's going to take children out of our babies, take babies out of our homes, just because you have a title, right? Just because you're a Supreme Court justice and I'm supposed to innately respect that. I don't innately respect that, because the innately respectable person in America has always been the one that has committed the worst atrocities against our people. So I won't trust it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to just not agree with basically everything that you just said right there. And, there's times where, I try to fool myself and I try to tell myself, things are getting a little better. I try, I'm trying to be hopeful, and I'm trying to look at things from, different points of view. I'm a sociologist. That's, what I do for a living. I study society, and, I'm always looking for the silver lining. I'm looking for just to shed light on issues maybe that are a little confusing to some.
Yeah.
But looking at the issue with ICWA and the history of the boarding schools, I mean, it's just hard. It's hard for me not to look at this country with disgust. It just is. I look at the legacy of settler colonialism. I look at the treatment really of all people in this country. And you really start to dive deep into this. And this is what I do for a living. This is what I have spent much of my adult life studying and teaching. And it's just hard for me not to just have just a lot of anger and certainly no trust of our government.
Yeah.
And just looking at the structure of settler colonialism, it's just hard for me, even here in 2022, to look at the situation and think really not much has changed. What I always tell people is that, yes, times have changed. We have new technology. Look, we have this fancy technology where we can communicate to anyone across the world who has YouTube. That's fantastic. We can have this conversation and other people elsewhere can listen to it. But what hasn't changed is the same structure that was put into place starting going way back 1492 is still with us today.
Yes.
And still affecting Indigenous people right here, right now.
When you talk about the idea that you're going to remove babies from Native people, you're talking about the same concepts that existed since the
100%.
time Europeans first landed on this continent.
100%. And then if you start looking, you start investigating, you follow the money, and you start looking at the people who are backing v. Holland, you start to see this is a well-oiled machine that we're up against, a well-oiled machine that has been put in place not just yesterday, but literally hundreds of years ago.
Dr. B's pun game is on fire right now.
Man.
The well-oiled machine, the big Texas oil
Well,
lawyer.
the word I like to use is like this meat grinder that we're just kind of thrown into. And, you know, how can Native people not be angry? How can Native people not be mistrustful of the government and have a little bit of hate in their heart? I know for me, just with the recent discovery of those bodies at these boarding schools, it was devastating to me. It was just devastating. And I started to really think about it. Because this is the thing is that, and you'd mentioned this earlier, and I think this is probably one of the most important points I try to get across to anybody. You are a fucking human being.
Mm-hmm.
You are a real person with, you know, a real spirit, a real soul.
Mm-hmm.
And just, I think about just these kids ripped away from their mothers, ripped away from their fathers, their grandparents, forced in these schools, surrounded around people who hated them. Mm-hmm. These sexual predators who came and raped them, in some cases murdered these kids. It's just horrifying to me. It's a horrifying story. And when, again, I was reading up on this topic this last week, and I was listening to Rebecca Nagel's her series called This Land. And if you haven't checked out This Land, you need to check it out. She has 2 seasons, and she just does an unbelievable job of explaining ICWA, what ICWA is supposed to do, some of the issues that have come up over the years, and some of the court cases that have been, you know, brought in front of these crazy conservative judges who have tried to do away with ICWA. It's just an absolutely incredible story to me. But I guess the point I'm trying to make, and the point I guess I would love to get across to anybody who's willing to listen, is that don't be so fixated on historical events. We need to start to really interrogate the structure of American society.
Yeah.
And the way that has been set up. It has been set up for the extermination of all Indigenous people. And nobody really can deny that. The history is what it is. And the destruction of Indigenous people is ongoing with, you know, the attacks on ICWA. I didn't realize that ICWA has been challenged more times than Obamacare. I mean, there's just so much to this story that's just absolutely incredible. I mean, you have, you know, the evangelical families who basically want to save Indian children.
Yes.
You have the adoption lawyers who see Native children and they see dollar signs. And you have these powerful, you know, corporations that want access to the land. The same corporations, the same lawyers that are backing, you know, Chevron, that want access to that oil. These are the same people who are working pro bono on behalf of these families who want to do away with ICWA. And it's just incomprehensible. And then you have these grandmothers. I can't remember the name of this lady in Minnesota. She was from White Earth Nation. And I think it's the right tribe. And when I heard her story and I heard what she went through, I mean, it just killed me.
Yeah.
That she just wanted to raise, she knew that her daughter had issues. She wanted to take her granddaughter in, and she just wanted to be what any grandparent would want to be to a child, what your grandmother wanted to be to you.
When you mentioned that, I think of because I never got to meet her. I think about the burden that she carried, and I wonder how big it was. Did she ever find, because I would want her to find peace before she died, right? Those are the things I have to think about, is like, did my grandmother, who was forced to watch a court system divvy out 3 different children to 3 different white families And the cold-blooded nature of it, at least the way I view it, I get it, it's Fresno Superior Court, so you're going to divvy those kids up in Fresno County. But like, you put them kids in the same city, like where they could just, this wasn't Fresno like this year. This is Fresno like, you know, like late 70s, early 80s,
yeah.
when there was like 300,000, you know, like I'll run into the same people like 3 or 4 times, like in a, you know, in a year and be like, dang, you're here. What are you doing here? Because it's Fresno, dude. It's mad small. Like, the point being, putting us in a space where we could potentially run into our biological grandmother who no longer has any legal say over us. That is just some wild levels of like just torture that you would place onto onto, you know, like the matriarch of our family, this woman who like is like the caretaker of our culture and our history, a basket weaver, like a basket making woman who is just carrying on like the Choi Numney legacy for us. And you've taken us from this woman, and she's heartbroken, torn up over it. And all I can do in my, she's been long gone. She's back with the ancestors, right? But like, I still think, did she find peace? I hope she found peace before she died. Those are the things that we're left as survivors to sort of bandy about, throw around in our brains, and just be like, I can only hope that she found some sort of peace, right? Because I haven't yet. And I have every reason not to.
Yeah. And I think about, you know, just all the families out there, people like yourself, you know, the aunties, the uncles, the parents in some cases, and just the pain and the trauma.
Yeah.
And it's no wonder why you see the depression and you see, you know, the high suicide rates and whatnot. And yeah, it's just devastating. It just absolutely is. And, you know, the one story that I'm referring to, thankfully, this woman was able to adopt her granddaughter, but the trauma that they put the kid through, the trauma that they put the grandmother through, this went on for years.
Can't take it away.
Cannot take it away. And it was only because of the persistence and the strength of this grandmother, you know, to keep pursuing, you know, help. And finally she found the right people to help her. Finally, she found the right people who could put her in contact with people who really understood ICWA and understood how the law worked. And, you know, thankfully she was able to adopt a child, but sadly this child was traumatized for years. And, you know, the kid seems to be doing fairly well. But I think about all the unhappy endings of the kids who were just adopted to who knows who. Yes. And the families that were broken up, the heartbreak on behalf of the community is just, it's incomprehensible. That type of pain is just really unbelievable.
That point about the community, right? I'm not saying this is a concept that only native people understand, but like when you take that child, it's not like that. It's that Euro lens thing again. It's not like you're just taking the child out of that family and only that household feels that pain. There's an entire network of people that are going to feel that pain because that child is introduced, not just it's that child is an integral part of the entire family network. Like, it's not just like, oh, that's my cousin. Like, the cousin is sister, brother levels of familiar with you. And therefore nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, greats, over there, over here, everyone is involved in that child's life. So when you take that child, you've stolen it from like 30 mothers and 30 fathers. Like, it's not just the one mother and father that are going through this deep gut-wrenching pain. It's not just one sister, one brother. You've stolen that child from dozens, hundreds of people that deeply love that child. And I know, you know, white folks will listen to this and be like, well, we love our children too. And fuck it, not the same. It's not the same way. It's not the same historical pain. It's not the same things that we've had to go through to keep our children. There isn't an Anglo Child Welfare Act. There's never been a time when white kids were snatched out of homes and placed into native homes, right? Yeah. Like, these concepts are very unique. We're the only group that has to prove ourselves by our blood quantum. This is a very ridiculous concept. This is a very real genocide that we've faced, and we continue to see these vestiges, these things that can come back like ICWA being threatened, that are very real to these families, very real to people like me. Like, I work at Fresno Superior Court. I work in the family law division. I have seen ICWA cases. Like, I fielded phone calls about ICWA cases. This is very real to me. I've navigated, or I've listened as people try to navigate the legal system, you know? So like, it's very real. It's not at all lost on me that these concepts of that grandmother who had a difficult time trying to find anyone that would give a damn about her case, it's not lost on me that that would happen, because when you're representing yourself, it's very difficult to even just find the right document to file, the right form to file, let alone successfully adopt a child that's yours rightfully.
Yeah, I think of all the families too who just gave up because the system was just too overwhelming.
You see that a lot. You can hear it in the tone.
Oh, I could only imagine.
Just going like, oh, okay, I guess I'll just, okay, thank you, bye. And you're like, no, like in your heart, you're like, no, stay on the phone. That's your child. Now, that's what, again, ICWA is not a perfect system. It requires, good actors within that system, people that will absolutely try to implement that law. And again, you mentioned it briefly, but like, federally unrecognized tribes aren't protected by ICWA, right?
That's right.
So you have these, if people would look up federally unrecognized tribes, I think they would be surprised how many there are and how many thousands of kids could be affected by the treatment, by being taken out of their homes, even with ICWA. But ICWA requires people to be, actively working in good faith. It's not just like it's an Indian child, therefore they must go to their native family.
It's definitely not. ICWA law is more complex than that. Yeah, it's not. Well, it's an Indian child. That means that it's going to go to a native family, a relative or somebody in the community. It's not as cut and dry as that. And there's still every single day an Indian child in this country is adopted into a non-native family.
Yeah,
I mean, it's incredibly common, and so obviously, ICWA isn't perfect. But if you talk to people who understand the law, if you talk to most states, I mean, most people are in favor of ICWA. Yeah. It really is, again, your evangelical whites, your adoption lawyers, they see ICWA as a roadblock to them, making their money. And of course, these big corporations who want to get access to the land, who see tribal sovereignty and this idea of tribal nationhood, this nationhood status as just another roadblock. So absolutely. We have some questions here. It says, Jamie, is your current last name your adopted parent's name? Did you ever think about changing it, or obviously changing your name wouldn't ease your trauma? Just wondering about that. Much love.
Oh, cool. So that my last name that I have now, Jamie Nelson. My first name has always been Jamie. Nelson is my adopted last name. I was originally Jamie Owen Smith. I have given some consideration to changing it. But ultimately I decided to just kind of keep rolling with my name. I don't know if it would reduce trauma in any way. The trauma is kind of like baked in. I don't know if it would help. I don't know. I think I might. I don't know. I was going to try to say something funny, but I don't have anything. I'll just keep my name.
So, we have Deborah here. She says, thank you for addressing this issue. It's so important, and for our Native children and families, prayers up. Yeah, this is probably, to me, one of the most misunderstood issues of today. And a lot of people have heard about, the mascot issue. Oh, those Indians want to get rid of mascots, right? Yeah. But I think when it comes to the Indian Child Welfare Act, when it comes to this idea of Indian children be adopted by white families, it's really not a topic that you see come up in the media.
No,
it's not discussed, certainly much in the news. I think the mascot issue got a lot of attention because of the Washington team. You made sure we got a lot of attention here in the Valley on that issue.
Yeah.
But when it comes to ICWA and it comes to the status of Indian children who are enrolled members or who have they don't have to be enrolled, by the way. That's also something that I think is important to remember, is that the child doesn't have to be an enrolled member. They just have to be eligible for enrollment.
Yeah.
Like this one child in Minnesota, this child was not enrolled. And when I think the county had contacted the tribe, they were saying, hey, do you want to take on this case? And the tribe didn't know about the kid, didn't really know who the kid was. And they're like, oh, no. But they did not get the proper information. They were not told that one of your citizens of your nation wants their granddaughter. They were not told that. That information was not passed on to the tribe. And so finally, when the tribe learned that one of their citizens wants to adopt their granddaughter, then all of a sudden, everything changed, because of course the tribe wants their citizen to have the chance to adopt, a community member. And so, the law is really complex, and it's not, I think, easy for people really to understand the situation in its totality, simply because of just a lack of understanding of settler colonialism, the history, the historical trauma that Native people have experienced throughout, the past 500 years or so.
And running into deep pockets is tough.
Oh gosh.
Deep pockets have a way of making the needle move where, the best of intentions just simply won't.
Yeah. And this family that lost this Native child, that wasn't able to adopt this Native child, they're connected to this court case. They're connected to the Brackeen v. Holland. And I think they're the key to this court case, because the Brackeen family was able to adopt the child. The child ended up with them. They were able to finish the adoption. It was a Navajo child, and the Navajo Nation basically just kind of threw their hands up. They tried to place the child into a Navajo family. They had a Navajo family that was ready to take on the child, but all of a sudden these people with deep pockets came in and they took the case pro bono, and they were able to complete that adoption. So that child, Antonio, that little boy, now has a new name, and he's with the Brackeen family. It's just incredible.
It's wild how they find nuance, and like how as a Navajo child, and they were steadfast on trying to find a Navajo family when they historically view us as all the same. So it's like, my point being, why couldn't you find a Native family just in general at that point? Sort of cast a wider net, because the Native child would be better off in a Native home, even if it wasn't its traditional tribal nation, better than a white family.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's like a astronomical stretch to say that or think that. That's
absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, see, we have hello to you both. Is there a way to retribalize yourself? I don't know my own origins, and I don't know what tribes my elders are connected to. Is there a way I can find that out? That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
It's kind of off the topic of ICWA, and going back to some of the problems with ICWA, the fact that we have so many tribes here that are not federally acknowledged, which ICWA does not address this problem. So you're right. There's literally there's thousands of Native kids who don't have, who are not members of federally recognized tribes, but who are in fact Native, who are in danger of being taken away from their families today, even with ICWA, which is really just, I think, incredibly problematic, especially in a state like California, where there's so many tribal communities that are practicing their culture, have never stopped practicing their culture. I mean, I have a lot of friends, people I grew up with, straight up Native. They are not members of federally recognized tribes.
Yeah.
And so it's a very unique situation. But then I think what she's talking about is, people who, maybe they find out that they're Native, and I've heard this term, retribalize, or disconnected natives, and retribalizing.
Is that me?
I don't think so.
I don't know what I am.
You know why? You know why I would say that? I would say reconnecting, yes, in the sense that because you were basically ripped from your family, ripped from your community, but you live in your community now, and you've done work, and I think that I think you've reconnected. This is just my view, and please correct me if you feel I'm wrong. But to a certain extent, I think you have done a lot of reconnecting. I think you have done a lot of work in our community. I mean, with the Yo Cut Sign campaign, with the Change the Name movement, you have done a lot to reestablish yourself in the community. Now, there isn't, I think, one way to go about that. And I think you went about it in the way that you felt that you can contribute.
Yeah. That's a really good way of putting it.
And not everybody is going to be able to contribute in the same way. Not everybody is going to want to be going to sweat lodge ceremonies and become a powwow dancer, or whatever way that maybe somebody thinks, oh, this is how you reconnect. I have to go become a dancer. I have to pick up a drum. And that might be for some people. Maybe some people want their way of reconnecting is, going to, I don't know, going to a powwow and just hanging out and meeting people. For others, it might be maybe trying to learn the language.
Yeah.
It may be going to school and getting a college degree and going back in the community like yourself, like you have done, to contribute in any way that you can through, again, your sign campaign, which I thought was brilliant, the Change the Name campaign. I mean, these are major issues that you worked on. And so I think that that reconnecting process that I don't know if I call it a process, but that reconnecting that you did is very powerful. And I've seen it over the years, just watching you grow as a person and just, seeing how far you came from when I first met you.
That's right.
And, and our conversations that we had, and just seeing you today, and just seeing the things that you've done, it warms my heart. It really, really does. And then and that I always pushed you. I wanted you to tell this story.
Yeah.
You
gave me a platform. I don't know if you remember this. It was one semester and I felt unprepared, but I remember like, it was a gift though. And you were like, hey, I would like for you to come into this. I wasn't in that particular course. Yes. You're like, come in and you're going to speak. You're going to provide some some insight about your story. And then you're going to give them an assignment to do. And I was just like, I'm going to do what? And we successfully made our way through it, but I was just shook and nervous. Cause at that point I was, that was a big challenge that you imparted onto me. You were like, you might not feel prepared, but you're prepared and you're going to do it and it's going to be dope. And it was a fun experience for me to be able to speak on that level at a, a college level like that. And I have seen your evolution even years ago. And I thought, man, he's going to go on to do some pretty good things. It's going to take you time to feel comfortable and, being able to be a person in the community, right, who hasn't been in the community because of what happened to you. Kill the Indian, save the man is tough to come back from. Oh. If the design is to kill you, in many instances, literally kill you, but if the design is to kill you and it doesn't quite work, we've seen this horror movie before. I'm the mutated monster that's storming around the village now. Right. But I'm trying to, kind of find my niche, find my groove, find my space, find where I'm at within this, within that concept of the mutated monster that's came home, because I'm home now. You are home now. You're not only home, but you're doing the good work. It's impressive. And this is what I wanted for you. Yeah. This is really what I wanted for you years ago. It's been almost 15 years now. Yeah, and it's been a long time. And, this is what I wanted for you. I wanted you to tell your story. I always felt like, man, this story needs to be told. Yeah. And needs to be shared. Can I tell you where I got it? Yeah, go ahead. Idea. So, the summer of 2020, the Black Lives Matter rally at Fresno City Hall, and I was there. DeAngelique Jackson was speaking, and the way that she was talking to that audience with the love that she was talking to them, and I remember the specific part that got me was when there had been all of this talk about these rallies turning violent and all this all the boogeymen that are created by folks who claim to be oppressed, talking about all the Black Lives Matter violence. And she gave this fiery speech to that crowd about what they're not going to do and why you're not going to do it. And I thought, as I sat there looking up, I was about 15 feet away, looking up at her and thinking, I have never done anything. I've just typed stuff. I've stood up for things, but I've never done anything. Taken on a task that meant something to our people. I'm not going to solve the greatest things that are oppressing our people, but I've never, in that moment, I was like, I've never done anything. I'm going to find something meaningful to do.
Oh,
And
it's
that's
beautiful.
when I took on, as I remember, I was running at Woodward Park, and I thought about the idea of that mascot because I had passed it while I run, because I run a lot. And I remember 15 years ago, you're like, dude, you got to stop running. You got to start sprinting. And I ended up fracturing my knee, stress fracture from too much running.
Oh, man.
And I thought about you. I was like, oh, man, he's right. I should have been sprinting. But anyhow, I was running at Woodward Park, and I came up with that idea. I was like, I don't know why this thing has survived as long as it survived uncontested. Like, I haven't heard a lot of people talking about it, but I know the history of the 6 decades of work that has been put in to try to get rid of these demeaning mascots, right? And I thought, yeah, I'm gonna do it. That's gonna be the thing that I do. And I didn't realize how much heat it would bring. I mean, there was like death threats, there were physical threats, there were just stalkers that came out of the woodwork. There was one woman who accused me of burning down one of the sacred Armenian homes, like on downtown Fresno. Just a weird psycho lady, and like all of that stuff because you want to remove a very overtly racist, image. And it's frankly, in the grand scheme of things, it's not changing a whole lot for Native people. But imagine something that would, like ICWA. Imagine the blowback people are facing across this country who are really sticking their nose into the ICWA business on behalf of Native people. Imagine the heat they're facing, because we face heat, like crazy heat, for standing up for what we believe in and what we know to be right and in the best interest of our people. We will face the ugliest things.
Absolutely.
So I can't imagine what's happening across the country tonight and tomorrow and over the next few weeks or whatever, because that's just a thing we face.
It's so much easier just to fall back and just kind of accept whatever the situation is. It's so much more difficult to put yourself out there, and it's not an easy thing to do. And I see a lot of people do it, and they really get put through the ringer.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, what advice would you have somebody looking to reconnect and retribalize? I always tell people that, wherever you're living, learn about the local community. I mean, we're living in your homeland right here.
Yeah.
We're living in Yokuts, Mono territory up in the Sierra foothills. And I always tell people, you live here in this area, you should learn a little bit about the local tribal communities. You should be supportive of their events, and you should try to learn their history as it concerns your own. If you can, obviously you try to make it back home wherever your people are from. And if you don't really know your tribal ancestry, I think there's a lot of Indian events that people can go to, like powwows.
Yeah,
that will make you feel like you're a part of the culture. But that's a tough one. I know that there's a lot of controversy. Like, well, a real Indian is somebody who knows where they're from and they have a tribal card and so forth. You were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
And that's a little problematic because of the consequences of settler colonialism and just the fact that how devastating it's been. And there are a lot of tribal people who are trying to reconnect later in life.
Yeah.
And I'm all about that. I really am. What I always tell people is just sit back, listen, and learn. You never want to be one of those people where you don't know shit and all of a sudden, you're looking for clout and you're looking to be a shot caller. I think that's something that can be a little ugly. People who are all of a sudden, they're born again Indians, right? And they're out there, thinking that, they're the leaders and they're the ones who are leading the charge on whatever. And I think that, if you are reconnecting, you're trying to learn, well, then that's what you should be doing. You should be sitting back and learning. And if you do find a place where you can help, then, go for it.
Yeah.
And, for you, I think, I was trying to push you because I could see that you had leadership qualities. I could see you had this incredible charisma. And for the viewers who don't know much about you, you've been involved in music and you have the gift of gab. And I thought, man, this young man, he can do something special if he just really harnesses, that spirit that's inside of him. And just watching you do it's just been really, really cool.
Well,
but
cool,
for other people though, I just tell, hey, learn about the local tribal communities, try to learn as much about your own community if you can. And then, just participate and and always tell people, sit back and, pay attention.
Yeah.
And,
one thing that I did
Yeah.
was I didn't know anything. Like I knew what my parents had told me. I remember Ron Good had provided me a family tree when I got out of high school. So I had that and I was like, all right, I'm Choi Numni and I'm Mono. What can I do with that? And then it took me into my, like mid to late 20s where I was like, I'm going to enroll in some American Indian Studies courses. And I initially had Michael Blackpool's courses and then your courses. And then from there kind of springboarded into other areas. And that was my sort of introductory level, introduction into the native larger space because I didn't know anything. And then I went from knowing nothing to knowing like a little bit, not enough to speak on it. It took me the longest time. And I still don't like speaking on it because I don't know it the way that I should know it. So I use broad terms like this is Yokut's land because it factually is. But if somebody asks me like, Choi Numni people, what do they do for this thing? I'll be like, man, you got to, I can lead you to some elders that may know that answer because I won't be the one to speak out of pocket on that situation. But I did find, speaking to this question about, finding your way, I guess, back is like, I just went to seek courses at City College because those courses, they would speak on local native tribal things, Yokut's people, Mono people, obviously covering this area, so those things really helped me a lot. Beautiful. And then from there springboarding into like books that you could read or springboarding into articles because now you have the opportunity to sort of just like read articles about specific tribal nations, and like yeah so those things really helped me.
And I think too, just generally speaking for people, just learn about what's going on in Indian country today. Just do your best to educate yourself about the issues. And, there's a lot of good history books out there. I think that's a great place to start. But like learning about ICWA.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, like I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of ICWA, but it wasn't until recently because of this court case coming up I really started to investigate a little bit more, and I started to realize, like, man, I didn't know as much as I thought I knew.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how complicated this situation really is, and all the connections with, again, these evangelicals and the adoption lawyers and these big firms that are just looking to just obliterate tribal sovereignty. It's a crazy situation. So we have a question right here. It says, as non-native allies, accomplices, and advocates, how can we help Native people to bring a greater sense of love, grace, and healing into the community? That's a great question. I'm gonna let you address that.
Yeah. So in many instances, I've thought of myself as a non-native, and I know it sounds weird because like I know that nativeness is not necessarily like blood quantum, right? So like I knew my entire life that I was native by like my sort of ethnic makeup and my blood makeup, but I didn't feel native. So I always approached it as an outsider. So even to this day, when I step into space like where Native people are at, I'm like, natives are here and I'm here. I don't know. I know that's not the right way of looking at it, but I'm big ears. I'm listening as much as I can, absorbing as much as I can, seeking out information, not from one particular source, almost treating it like science and like bouncing it off and figuring out, okay, this is sort of like legend storytelling perspective, and then there's like factual stuff. Like ICWA has a lot of factual stuff. Like if you get into the minutia of ICWA, it involves like things that you can trace to dates.
A lot of data.
If you get into legend stuff, like like some of the stuff that like sacred things that Native folks will talk about, those a lot of times will be interpreted through slightly that way or slightly this way, depending on which family you're talking to. But it's always good to listen to that because those familial perspectives matter, right? So you never disregard someone's viewpoint
100%
from their family and then go, well, their family said that, and I heard this thing over there. Well, both are equally true.
That's right.
But digging into the minutia of things like ICWA, other instances throughout Indian country and throughout our history as people on this continent, it's good to just dig deep and get as knowledgeable as you possibly can on those subjects because they can be tedious. They can almost border on boring because when you commit a mass genocide over centuries, you start reading the same thing over and over again, right? So
it's interesting that you say it because it's what you're saying is true.
You know what I'm saying? Like it's almost like, well, more brutality, and then page 5, more brutality. you pull the book and you're like 238 small village of native people slaughtered. Like it's this again. The whole book is this.
I had a student one time ask me, why do you always talk about the bad stuff? Why don't you talk about the good? And I thought, you tell me the good, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
And
because there's good within, I guess what I'll say is there's beautiful within the native cultural element.
Absolutely.
But when you're
beautiful.
telling the history of native people in this country, like if it's a course about,
if you're talking about
Indian
native
Studies
history,
101, yeah,
post 1492, you're just talking, every page is a massacre, a forced removal.
Yeah.
Some pretty terrible situations. There's obviously these stories of people who struggle and fight back and are looking to, maintain their traditions. You do see those valiant, struggles to, remain free. And yes, those are amazing, incredible stories, but they all end really badly as well. And what I tell people is that, the relationship between settlers and indigenous people has always been one of conflict.
Yeah.
And it's always been one of one group trying to destroy the other. And we've been on, the wrong side of that.
Yeah.
And so it's really difficult because I think people want the fantasy. Well, it was Thanksgiving. What about that? They don't want the reality. I start getting into the reality of the Thanksgiving story, and people are like, well,
you're a bummer, dude.
I am a bummer, man.
Yeah, really.
I am a bummer.
Yeah.
I really am. When, people, oh, you want to learn about Thanksgiving? I'll teach you about Thanksgiving. Oh, you want to know about Pocahontas? Oh, let me tell you the
pedophilia that goes on there.
Yeah. Let me tell you the story of Pocahontas. Let me tell you the story of the Wampanoag in the so-called Pilgrims.
Which, I mean, you tell the story of Pocahontas and it starts getting into the very contemporary MMIW, missing and murdered Indigenous women movement. Cause like these are the same concepts that are existing now.
100%.
I wanted to answer something
go ahead.
Speaking to, because that's my friend Arthur who asked that question. Arthur is one of the people who, during the last few years, who I've, when I was on the Facebook platform, I've since like deleted my account, but like, I would lean into Arthur. Arthur is a very brilliant thinker. He's somebody who really gives a shit about this world and gives a shit about people. One of the things that I did as a person who viewed himself as a non-native ally in many instances, even though I know I'm fully native, but like when I step into like the native space, I would feel like, man, I feel like an outsider. The sign campaign was something that I did not for me. It was specifically designed. And I remember when I spoke with Fresno American Indian Health Project, I was like, okay, I want to donate this money. I'm going to donate it to them. It's a local organization that helps local native people. Like both like, Choi Numi Yokuts or Yokuts people, and also any of the native people in this area. I knew that they would do the right thing with the money, but I specifically said, I would like this to go towards very specific causes. And I watched as the money went to them. And then I received a phone call and it said, hey, we have these 2 native elders that need help. They're sisters. They need some help. And will you allow for us to take this amount of money out of that money? I think it was like $700 or something like that to help them like with a deposit for an apartment. And immediately, yes. And I just started crying because that's exactly what my heart wanted for that. So I'm not saying that the way that you can help, bring about a greater sense of love, grace, and healing into the community is monetary all the time. Right. But when I put my mind to that Yokuts land yard sign campaign, I did it thinking, well, I can get this land acknowledgement tool into the hands of people. And, it's a sign. It doesn't save anything, but it's just, man, this is Yokuts land. Let's get it. But the money would go back to something, to real people, to real human beings, like those 2 elders that hopefully now are living good, or at least have the opportunity to have their own roof over their head as opposed to being unhoused. Like,
it's interesting that you say this, because what I have learned that philanthropy when it comes to native people really isn't there. We are not the community that people are giving much to.
Yeah.
And I was really shocked by that. I was really shocked to learn that there isn't a lot of organizations outside of the organizations that we create on our own that are looking to.
Did you think maybe there'd be like a white guilt thing?
I really thought,
really put these people through the ringer. Let's just give
help
them
them
a
out.
$10,000.
I really did. I thought there would be more philanthropy when it came to Native people.
Yeah.
And I guess the philanthropy that they want, they just want our kids, right?
Yeah.
That's the philanthropy that they want to give.
Keeps on giving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We know what's best for your land. We'll take it over, and we'll give you some payments for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there isn't a lot of non-native organizations out there that are really working on behalf of tribal communities. And I guess what I would say to anybody who's non-native is just be supportive of tribal sovereignty. I think that would be the best ally that you can be as a non-native person, is doing your best to understand this kind of complex relationship between the federal government and tribes, because it is a really complex relationship, and do your best to really understand the structure of settler colonialism and be supportive of tribal communities and their fight to remain free, to remain nations, to be able to raise their kids and pass on their culture in a good way, in a healthy way.
Yeah.
To be able to practice their spirituality, to be able to keep their languages alive. I think there's just so many people out there just don't understand any of these issues. And if you do want to be a good ally, if you do want to be a friend of the community,
yeah,
you have to learn. You have to tell yourself, I don't really know much about these situations here. I don't know much about this history. And you have to educate yourself a little bit. And there might be some things that you just don't understand. There may be some things that are just difficult for you to hear.
Yeah.
But if you could just be supportive of tribal communities, being supportive of this movement of self-determination.
Yeah.
I think that's the best that anybody can do. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think tribal people are looking for handouts. I don't think tribal people are looking for even white people to feel guilty. I think that what we want as tribal people, and you could, add on to this, is that we just want to be free in our homelands. We want to be free to raise our kids in a good way.
Yeah.
To have our friends and our family members and our children not feel depressed, to not be suicidal, to not look in the mirror. And I was just talking to my students about this today, and we were talking about, growing up in white America and sometimes looking at yourself and not liking the reflection that you see in the mirror.
Yeah, me and that plate glass window when I was
Yes,
like
when you
7 years
mentioned that
old.
plate glass window, I thought about when I was a kid. I remember looking in the mirror. There were times where I looked in the mirror and I just hated what I saw.
Yeah.
And I would think to myself, I would look at myself and I thought, I just wish I was white. It'd just be so much easier if I was white.
Do you know
Seriously?
Do you know why I talk like this? Like with this, if you hear me on the phone, you're like, okay, this is a white dude. I think we're going to get down to some business, right? When I received that bullshit racist thing about that boy's too dark to be Indian.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to be the best white dude you can possibly imagine. I'm going to be so much whiter than you that I'm going to get so much more credibility for my whiteness. I'm going to start talking like this. I used to literally listen to Nightline. I would watch Nightline like to get smarter because Ted Koppel was mad smart and it was like a smart show.
Ted Koppel.
So I'd stay up like
smart.
late at night. I would read the dictionary, stuff like that, like both to like just educate myself. But I was like, I have like this weird assimilated, mutated spite thing. I was just like, I'm gonna be whiter than them and better at it. Like I'm gonna fucking run circles around their whiteness with my whiteness. Like it was just weird. What it ended up doing is it helped me in job interviews because my voice is good. I have a good voice. So it's like I get in these interviews and they're like, God, this guy's a really fucking smart guy.
Jamie, it's funny because we were just talking about this today in class. I was telling my students, I was like, because I grew up in a community that was mostly white and Native. I didn't really grow up around African Americans or Hispanics, and it was mostly Native Americans, white. But I feel like I had a little bit of an advantage because I was around a lot of white people.
Yeah.
And I kind of peeped their game a little bit, their mannerisms and what made them uncomfortable and what would make them comfortable. And I felt like I've been able to use that to, be able to survive in academia and professionally and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my students in class and a lot of them were telling me, it's like, I don't have any white friends.
Yeah.
And I don't really know a lot of white people.
Yeah.
And I was telling them, like, you at least have a couple of acquaintances that are white. They might teach you a thing or two, about maybe how not to be, or at least just understanding just kind of how they are. Because white culture, I hate to say it in that way, because that's how it's done us. Oh, native culture, like we're just one culture, and we're not. But I think white folks in general, generally speaking, they're just very, very unique. They're very, very unique. You know that better than anybody.
I used the last, I don't know, 5-10 years. I'm getting out of it now, but I used the last 5-10 years to use this tool that I cultivated from my assimilated whiteness to dunk on all the white people. I swear to God, I'm here to dunk on them. Like, just Google Sean Kemp dunk gif, and that is me just swinging that arm, whap, and then going bow. Because I just got tired of like dealing with racist bigots, man. And and I know I've kind of couched that in some humor, but it's very real when you get like base level, willfully ignorant bigots that think they have the moral and intellectual authority over you by virtue of their skin color, and them thinking of you as somebody who is not smart enough. I will wield this son bitch like a weapon against them and show them you have no ability to hang with me in any form, an argument, or any sort of intellectual social setting. I will dunk on you. And I've had to like kind of calm that down, because I realized it started to become this unwieldy thing where I would just be like, just like stab anybody with it. And so I've like, in the last like 6 months to a year, I've had to really kind of throttle back, because like these things can be tough on us. Like when you start to take on this idea of like, I'm fighting for my people and I will guard, I'm guarded, I'm already traumatized. You start to become unwieldy, and you start to not even know, you don't recognize yourself anymore, because you start to lose yourself in that whole idea of like fighting for something bigger, and you don't realize you're just being an asshole. So I've kind of had to really take a step back.
I mean, and one thing I always try to remind people too, because I'm around a lot of white folks at work, and I have my own jiu-jitsu gym, and I have people from all kinds of different backgrounds. And what I love about training jujitsu is that when we just get to come in, we just all do something that we love, that we all enjoy, no matter what our background is. We start to find out that we all have a lot in common, and we could get along fairly well if we just kind of put aside a lot of the BS. And I think there's just a lot of people just don't want to put aside their BS. And they got to always be right about whatever issue. Their religion's got to be right. Their politics has to be right. And now with social media, there's just so much propaganda out there, and the confirmation bias is just on an all new level. And all people do every single day is just reaffirm just all their nonsense. And I just think that I wish that more people would train jujitsu. One thing I love about jiu-jitsu, of course, jiu-jitsu would have to come into the conversation, but
it's all right. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yes, ICWA and jiu-jitsu, they go together. Not really, but one of the things I really love about it is that it does bring people together, and I wish that we could do that more. I think there would be more understanding of each other, because I think that what I feel like I've been able to do in a small way with even just training jiu-jitsu is like, people have a better understanding of Native Americans. They come into the gym and they're like, well, can you tell me a little bit about Native culture? Some people, well, what about, do you guys have a religion? And, I feel like I'm able to tell people in a human way, not as a teacher, not in front of a classroom giving a lecture, but just as a human being. Hey, well, this is kind of how we like to do things. And, might be a little different than you, but these are the things that we find important. And I think there's a lot of good people out there who are willing to learn and willing to listen. I think there's a lot of folks out there who want to be good allies and want to be, advocates. They just don't know how. And they're afraid as well. That's understandable. Really is. Let's see if we have anything else here.
Questions? What are we up to? We're almost at 2 hours.
Yeah,
we're out here we're violating all the podcast rules.
We are definitely
we're going to do this thing all night. Welcome.
Maybe we
9 hours later,
we'll just keep going all the way to this this court hearing tomorrow. Let's just kind of get this thing summed up here. I think 2 hours would be a good time limit. So I just want to give you the opportunity to let people know how they can reach out to you If they,
Oh,
yeah.
word. Okay. So I am on the Instagram platform in case you want to be my buddy or send me some stuff. It's at Cockamamie Jamie. I also run the Yo Cuts Land Instagram. I feel so weird doing this. Just like, yo, come see me. At Yo Cuts Land. That's probably the one that you would want to follow because that's something where I will find things from the community and post it and try to occasionally insert something that's edifying, to the community, teaching about Native culture, etc., showing some Native photos and things of that nature. But if you want to like holler at me and see my dog Pete run around the house and like listen to fart noises that I found on the internet, you can find me at Cockamamie Jamie, Cockamie Jamie, Jamie.
And I would follow both because it's pretty entertaining.
Yeah.
Your Instagram. So
yeah.
And so hit him up on Instagram. You are involved in music. You want to spit a few bars here before we go?
No.
Can you do that?
I
mean, you're holding a mic. You got the headphones on.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't got. And you got any beats? Shoot, I'll kick some acapella. No, I got none. If I start freestyle, the reason if I start freestyling, I'm gonna start cussing, and if I start cussing, I'm gonna start talking weird. It's just something I do. Like when I freestyle, for some reason, it just gets just so damn immature. So I don't want to talk about a subject like ICWA and be like, yeah, ICWA, you can, like.
That's true. This is true. But check out, if you want to hear Jamie spit a couple of bars, definitely check out his Instagram. And you have a lot of great content on there. How's your music going? I mean,
yeah, I'm still writing.
You're still writing.
I write on occasion. I've done this thing where, and I would encourage if you're a musician or especially a young MC, a young artist who's trying to rap. And I get that rap doesn't revolve around freestyle anymore, but like if you would like write a few lines and then like not complete songs, just write a few lines, create space in between those lines. Like here's this one line, space. Here's this other line that I wrote, space. Fill in those gaps with freestyle stuff. It's a tool sharpener. It will help you become a better MC. But don't ever try to run up on me with your mic skills because I will embarrass you in front of your family, in front of your kinfolk. Real talk. So
we have I think around 15 people who are still with us. If you would like to ask a question, we're going to be on for at least another 3 minutes here. We'll end it around two hours in. But yeah, if you have another question, feel free to type that into the chat and ask away. But so what's the future for you?
The future. I don't know yet. I decided that I would take about a year off from doing anything because this is something that we got into a little bit, but these projects take a toll on me. Like the trauma is real. I think a lot of people think trauma is like a light switch that you can just be like, yeah, I choose not to be traumatized today. And it just doesn't work that way. So, but with this ICWA thing coming up, I decided I was contacted by the ACLU and they were like, would you be willing to kind of get involved and tell your story? And I said yes, which was me saying, okay, that year I'm going to pause that and not only like put myself out there, but talk about the most traumatizing thing that's ever happened to me. So not only did I not take a year off, I like put myself like really deeply into it emotionally. So we'll see. I would like to take some time to not be fighting for something. And I know it sounds difficult for some people to understand, but it's like, again, I need to take care of myself because I did have a 2-decade-long, like bout with depression and just mental health issues. So I'm always trying to advocate for the idea that you got to take time out to advocate for yourself to really kind of like take care of yourself and be healthy.
Such a great point.
So I don't know what's coming up as far as that's concerned. But man, I'm just going to keep living life and doing what I do, trying to.
Well, I'm really proud of you, and I'm really great, honored that you would take the time to share with us, and I'm hopeful for the best tomorrow. Obviously, we're dealing with a very conservative Supreme Court.
Yeah,
and nothing that happens tomorrow will shock me. And of course, we were talking about the elections as well, the midterms and whatnot.
Yeah,
just a lot of things moving around. But I am really proud of how far you've come. And yeah, it's just great to just, see you doing the things that you're doing. And I'm just happy that in some, minor way that I've been able to kind of,
Yeah.
be a part of your journey in some way.
Major way. Not even
Yeah.
minor, man. Like back to the beginning when we first started this 2-hour long podcast. The that moment when you broke down the history of our people when it comes to this version, this iteration of the genocide, and letting me know that that I'm held by the entirety of Native people with love and with honor, and that that I'm going to be welcomed home. That mattered so deeply to me, and it set me off on this now 15-year journey to kind of like find myself. And it's sometimes it feels like the needle's not moving because like you're struggling, but like you keep moving forward and keep seeking information and knowledge. And I wouldn't have been here. I don't think. I know a lot of people say those types of things. I wouldn't have been here as fast as I got here if it wasn't for that breakdown in your office where you kind of broke down the history of this thing.
Well, I think that's a great, way to end the show. And, like I said, I just, thankful that I had a chance to meet you and watch you grow. And I look forward to see what you're going to do in the future. And, yeah, tomorrow, we'll just kind of see what happens, and we might have to come back and do this again, depending on, some of the issues that come up here in the Valley. So I hope you'd be open to coming back on the show again.
I totally would. And yeah, thank you. And to the 15 people who are still watching, Dr. B is going to choke me out in my living room using some of his Brazilian.
Yeah, he's got a
jiu-jitsu
carpet over. He's
techniques.
got a carpet over here, so we can.
You're going to hear me make noises like. You're going to watch me fade into the milky twilight.
All right. So we're beyond 2 hours now. Again, this is a 7 Generation podcast. I appreciate everybody tuning in. And again, don't forget to reach out to Jamie. I'll make sure to put his Instagram handles in the show notes as well. All right. Till next time. Peace.
Bye-bye.